While I've tended to most areas of the new CRZ in some way, shape or form this year, its 10-year-old hybrid engine bay still remains untouched. So I thought it was time to address that with a deep clean, surface rejuvenation and quick colour code. So while the relatively low mile compact hybrid engine bay wasn't filthy, was still sporting enough unsightly surface dirt to warrant a good clean. And while I was hoping to tie in the addition of some shiny bolt-ons as I have done in previous videos, couldn't justify dropping the grand it would cost to do so, so just aimed to paint the boring plastic engine cover wrinkle red and replace the factory oil filler cap with the anodised one I rocked on the Nismo instead. But these bits combined with a deep clean using some homegrown CarGods products that I'd recently been blessed with should, I reckon, be enough to get it looking clean, presentable and somewhat purposeful. Now, being a hybrid, I thought it made sense to disconnect the main power supply to the single motor up front before thoroughly wetting things down, which for any other CRZ owners watching who might be interested is done via a secret twin 10mm bolt secured switch on the battery pack in the boot. And while I was at it, disconnected the standard battery up front as well just to be safe. And because this car doesn't have an alternator, there wasn't really anything I felt needed covering with plastic, so just bunged up the exposed rubber intake pipe with a towel to keep the inside of the airbox dry and called it a day for the basic pre-cleaning prep at that. So first up for the economical Honda then was a quick reduced pressure pre-rinse with the washer to knock off any loose dirt. And while you watch me do that, it's probably worth mentioning that my temperamental Rode Video Go mic had unfortunately crapped over a good chunk of the cleaning audio here with a horrible loud hiss, which meant I couldn't realistically leave any affected clips running, so I've had to adjust the composition of the video accordingly. But hopefully you understand, and I've already ensured it won't happen again by breaking the offending piece of tat into bits. So the detachable plastic engine cover that was to be painted later on was first treated to an application of CarGods' dedicated new Bay Immaculate engine cleaner, and while both this and the power dressing that I'd be utilising afterwards are only offered in bulk 5 litre form, CarGods do also sell professional 1 litre sprayers of their own, so used one of those in conjunction with the brightly coloured chemical to saturate the cover before tickling it over with a nice Feathertip brush that had arrived with a handful of others to ensure any light dirt, grease and oil was gently agitated away prior to the piece being rinsed off and removed, ready for masking and painting later on. The rest of the engine bay was then tackled in a similar manner, mostly with the same super soft Feathertip brush, as it was only compact and so didn't really require anything big and bulky. But a more firm plastic bristled CarGods brush was used on any exposed metal parts like the rough cast aluminium inlet manifold, as was a matching coloured mini barrel brush, which was the perfect size for instantly accessing any awkward nooks and crannies that a more traditionally designed brush might struggle to. Well, when working off camera, I generally attack the entirety of a small engine bay like this in one fell swoop. Tried to rinse any freshly agitated areas off separately here, just to prevent things from potentially drying, as filming always extends the process considerably. And although this product is intended to be used as is, got the potent feeling it could potentially be diluted down a bit, but a generous 5 litre freebie meant I was more than happy to use it straight from the can to thoroughly clean my bay here. So once the engine bay had been sufficiently degreased, the underside of the bonnet needed a bit of a going over too. And while it does make sense to clean this prior to the bay so that you're working in a top-down manner, I often do it after the engine to save the large amount of overspray it creates from sitting on the car for too long. But regardless, before I cleaned it in pretty much the same manner as I did the engine, first blanketed that over with some CarGod's Arctic Storm snow foam just to allow the various components to soak for that little bit longer, and again just try and keep things wet while I film myself tending to the bonnet. Now, while it wasn't too bad and mostly came up fine with just a soft brush, the silicone grease saturated latch needed a slightly more thorough seeing to with the stiffer ones to strip back the sticky white stuff that I'm guessing caking on is part of the standard service procedure. But I didn't want it tainting my aftershots here, so got rid before thoroughly rinsing off. The engine bay itself was then thoroughly rinsed off one last time to remove all of the snow foam, residual engine cleaner and freshly dislodged dirt, being as thorough as I realistically could without unnecessarily driving water into 10-year-old engine components, which is an awkward balance to try and strike, but one you should aim for nonetheless, as you don't want dirt still knocking about after you're done, but neither do you want to pressure wash your car's beating heart to the point of cardiac arrest. It was then time to dry the engine bay to rid it of the bulk of the standard rinse water, as while I do like to wet dress things following a clean, would prefer not to have a hybrid engine bay completely sodden for too long if I don't have to, so blasted most of the loose rinse water away with the twin turbine Bruhl beast, leaving things free from any excess water but still damp enough to encourage a subsequent all-encompassing water-based dress. With everything relatively deep cleaned and semi-dried off then, I called upon CarGod's power dressing to help rejuvenate all parts of the engine bay from plastic to paint, thoroughly dousing it in the versatile water-based dressing which I suspect would also be great on things like wheel arches and older, more robust interior trim. And this isn't a product you want to be shy with in my experience, as this part of the process is all about obtaining a nice uniform finish. And it's only really a generous application and subsequent soak that can truly achieve this, so it generally pays to be plentiful. Now, while you can technically just leave it at that, as a water-based dressing like this will, given enough time or a bit of heat from the engine, naturally dry on its own, I wanted to soak up any excess product with a dry brush and microfibre towel here, as I wouldn't be hooking up the power and cranking it over any time soon, and didn't like the idea of pooling product soaking into hybrid nooks, crannies and gaskets for hours on end, so spent a bit of time working it over to ensure the engine bay was left with a thoroughly dressed but generally dry finish. Although I would have liked to have then washed the car, didn't realistically have enough time to do so before it was going to get dark and damp, so held off on that. But before I packed it in for the day, did commit to wiping down and masking up the engine cover in the shed, utilising some masking fluid, which is basically just watered down latex, on the fiddly Honda lettering, which was applied with a fine paintbrush, which seemed to work well enough. So got an initial layer down on camera here to give you the general gist, before applying a few more, as well as a bit of tape over the main rectangular panel off camera later that evening. The following morning saw me blanket the body of the CRZ over with some of the CarGod's Arctic Storm snow foam to both rudely awaken the neighbours who've been messing about with the clocks and so mistakenly believe it's an hour earlier than it actually is, and to more importantly soak the overspray splattered car in stable citrus suds for a few minutes. And I thought this side-eye shot was pretty cool, so decided to make use of it for the entirety of the wash montage, including the subsequent rinsing off of the fresh foam along with any loose dirt it had managed to dislodge. CarGod's Proteus Pure Shampoo, which smelt just as citrusy as the snow foam, was then used in conjunction with a microfibre noodle wash mitt to methodically rid the car of any remaining dirt, be that from the road or from the engine bay clean the day before, working from top to bottom as per. And because it was relatively cool and damp, I didn't really have to worry about suds drying on the surface, which was a welcome change. But either way, I made sure the whole car was given a good contact wash, paying particular attention to the front end of it, which had obviously been exposed to the bulk of the overspray the previous day. It was then of course thoroughly rinsed off from top to bottom with the old Kranzle washer at full pressure, using the quick disconnect stubby gun over the longer lance, as there ain't much room for manoeuvre here. And for any southerners watching, no, there isn't a hosepipe ban here, and hasn't been all year in fact. But to be honest, even if there was, at this damp time of year, would likely continue to wash regardless, as the amount of water I'm using for a weekly car clean pales in comparison to the amount the utilities companies themselves happily hemorrhage from leaky pipes on a daily basis. Once I'd attempted to run the water table dry for the sake of a YouTube video, then decided to blow dry the car off rather than towel it, partly to annoy the neighbours some more, but also because I don't nearly use it as much as I should. But thankfully my car was sporting just enough superficial lotion and potion protection here to make a blow dry like this effective, so cracked on with it until the vast majority of the standing rinse water had either been noisily driven or evaporated away. After the body had been washed and dried, I popped the bonnet to thoroughly wipe down the easily overlooked shuts, which I find particularly satisfying following a thorough engine bay clean, as it's such a smooth and simple affair when compared to wiping over gritty, neglected ones that haven't seen the light of day in years. So just gave these bits a straightforward once over until they were as dry as the exterior. I then neatly re-greased the bonnet latch and gently spritzed the mechanism below with some spray lube to keep things functioning as they should. Then all that was left to do here at least was re-electrify things via the switch in the boot and the battery up front, before firing it up and checking the dash for warning lights and the engine for weird noises, of which thankfully there were none. With everything ship-shape out front then, it was time to head to the shed for a few quick coats of Wrinkle Red on the engine cover. And while I'm far from a rattle-can rookie, still don't really enjoy the painting process and so tend to rush it. But to be fair, I couldn't really afford to be spending the hours on end a proper job would require for the sake of 60 seconds worth of footage anyway, as it takes me long enough to get content in front of you as it is. So prioritise simply getting it done over getting it perfect here, which meant 3 or 4 hastily applied coats which were hurried along with a hairdryer in between. But it was left to dry overnight, as even after working quite quickly here, was still dusky and unfilmable outside by the time I'd finished. The cover was then carefully demasked the following morning, and while the tape came off a treat, the lettering was a right fiddly mess, but after a bit of faffing did thankfully manage to clean them up to an acceptable standard, which meant I could then plonk it back into place over the freshly cleaned inlet manifold, before swapping out the ugly factory plastic filler cap for the nice billet aluminium piece taken from my last car to just about leave the engine bay after shot ready. So while this wasn't the amazing fresh bolt-on transformation I'd initially envisaged for the engine bay, it still served to show that you can deep clean an aging hybrid's engine without causing a deadly shock to either you or the car's system if you take a few simple precautions first. Yes, the freshly painted plastic cover was far from perfect, but it can always be done again, as can the metal part of the intake, which despite being given a good clean, really needed dusting over with some satin silver. But aside from those few bits, for a 10-year-old engine it really didn't look too bad. Thankfully, the fresh CarGods gear kept the cleaning side of things straightforward, and while my main focus here was their new bulk engine cleaner and dressing products, the other fresh smelling 500ml they sent in addition seemed to work a treat too, so would definitely recommend checking them out for yourself, which you can do via the direct links listed in the description below. So as always, thanks for watching, and hopefully this video has left you resting as easy as me, knowing my 10-year-old engine bay is now more presentable than most people's modern interiors.